In the past 12 months, generative AI has exploded into the mainstream. GPT-4 can be used to generate coherent text in various registers. Stable Diffusion outputs realistic or stylized images, given minimal description of how and what to generate. And 11 Labs API can turn text into voices with realistic inflection and emotion. As I watched people in my life and across the internet begin to play with these algorithms, I grew fearful. Some people took what they told the generator to do and presented it as their own work, gleaning pride and profit from it. What if generators are destined to choke out people's innate desire for creating art? What if the artistic and literary skills I and many others worked on developing throughout my life become obsolete? What will become of our species? My anxieties abated, however, as I saw many people taking the outputs of generators and transforming them into new art forms that would not have been possible without the newfangled programs. Memes made from voice synthesizing programs replicating the voices of recent US presidents cropped up. The game Origins, in which every character responds in real time to the player by using a text generator to create their dialogue, released. On this platform, the channel DugDug made hilarious content by asking a text generator to cheat in chess, or make video game characters fight to the death. As we develop new artistic technologies, we fear what old skills they may replace, I reminded myself. When the physical camera emerged, paintings no longer became the premier way of documenting the world. When digital film cameras became less popular, the skills of lighting analog camera shots and developing film became less important. Even if my skills become less important, they won't be entirely irrelevant so long as some people somewhere still appreciate them. Plus, I shouldn't be afraid of change. I should move with it and embrace these new technologies, adopting them into my workflow where appropriate to become a faster, better artist, right? Something about that last part didn't sit right with me. Why should I embrace the generators? Using them felt ghoulish. My very soul was disturbed. I need to know, at least for myself, where the line falls between ethical use of a generator and unacceptable use. This video will be a logical examination of as many perspectives on the use of generators in art as I can enunciate, from 2 ethical frameworks. We'll get to what those are in a minute, hold your horses, because I am a box-brained little boy, and I require logic to solve my emotional problems and matters of conscience. Anyway, if you find yourself ethically confounded by AI, or even if you already have a clear grasp on how you use generators, I urge you to join me on this journey. By the end of this video, we'll both be able to describe just how and why generative AI tools should and should not be used in our art. Before we can dive into the perspectives on generators, I need to explain ethical frameworks. Essentially, these are rule sets that help individuals determine the most moral thing to do in any given circumstance. The first ethical framework we'll be considering is rule utilitarianism. It says that the most moral thing to do is to stick by the rule that creates the most benefits and the least harm in the most situations possible. While quantifying benefit and harm can get nebulous, the basic idea of this framework is understandable. The next ethical framework is Kantianism, named for the philosopher who coined it, Little Black Ant. Basically, it says that the most moral thing to do in any circumstance is the one that follows a rule that you can apply in every circumstance. For example, if you say it's moral to break a promise for a reason and then assume everyone broke promises whenever it was convenient to them, the concept of promise would no longer mean anything, so your original rule would be moot. Part of making your moral decisions generalizable, says Kantianism, is following the categorical imperative. Act in such a way that you treat all people, whether in your own person or in the person of any other, never merely as a means to an end, but always at the same time as an end. It's a bit confusing, but it's kind of like the golden rule, but it says why. If you acted in such a way that you would not want enacted upon you, your action does not generalize, and is therefore illogical and unethical. Kantianism is probably a bit harder to understand, but basically it's just asking, would taking this action in any circumstance still be moral? Or even more simply, does this generalize? Now, let us go forth and analyze some rules about the use of AI generators with the tools of rule utilitarianism and Kantianism. After listening to many discussions about generative AI and art, I've brainstormed several rules that portions of the population believe in, at least subconsciously. Let's start with a relatively lenient rule. It is always moral to use AI generators whenever one wants to, as long as one's goal in using them is not to exploit others. First, let's look at this idea through rule utilitarianism. Consider the expected benefits and damages of adopting this law universally. Benefits could include the following. People can generate and share memes, providing people with moments of levity. People can create new kinds of art not possible without the use of generators, like the aforementioned game Origins. People can make existing kinds of art faster, bouncing ideas off a text generator or using image generators to fill in visuals. People cannot use generators to produce derogatory, dishonest, or deceptive content. So, for example, people cannot use generators to automate the production of content without disclosing the generator's involvement, as some promote you can now do on YouTube. Oh, create faceless YouTube videos for free, earn thousands, they say. Yeah, not very ethical behavior. Damages could include the following. Many people would not hire artists for jobs that a generator can do, thus depriving the artists of income and forcing them to move to a different field, adapt in their current field, or perish. People may not choose to make art when they want something to exist, and thus may lose out on the benefits that come from the mental process of making art. Wait, what does that mean? So, according to an article by NPR, link in the description, the act of making art not only lowers the levels of a stress-indicating hormone called cortisol and increases blood flow to the brain's reward center, but also stimulates one's imagination and allows one to practice more adaptive responses to troubling situations. Making art, be that by drawing, molding clay, or writing poetry, literally helps your brain be more positive in the short and long term. And when you're more positive, you're more capable of helping others find joy. When you turn the process of making art over to AI generators, you miss out on those benefits. There's also a third hidden detriment that we'll get to later because we already have quite enough evidence to unpack. From a rule utilitarian perspective, generators seem to marginally improve the lives of most people who have access to them and only harm artists, although more drastically. One of the flaws of rule utilitarianism is that it is highly subjective. Before one can determine the best course of action, one must first determine how much value and in what units certain outcomes possess. Simplifying every outcome to a monetary value could be a good solution when asking a question like, should we build this highway displacing people to allow others more efficient transportation to work? But how do you put a monetary value on laughter, or life, or self-actualization? If you're acting from a rule utilitarian perspective, whether you choose to accept this rule or not depends entirely on your subjective valuing of the benefits and drawbacks. I can't answer that part for you. Moving on, let's consider this from a Kantian perspective. The rule is already phrased in a generalized sense. It's not a judgment of any particular situation. It also seems to be in line with Little Black Ant's categorical imperative to consider others as ends in and of themselves. However, there's something this rule obscures. Exploiting others is not defined. Is selling AI art without a disclaimer exploiting others? Probably. From a Kantian perspective, this would be treating prospective buyers as a means to an end, money, by not giving them the full picture that they might care about. Well, then, is selling AI art with a disclaimer exploiting others? You aren't exploiting the prospective buyers, but perhaps you are exploiting someone else, the artists who created the work the generator was trained on. Let's talk about a class action lawsuit filed this January against multiple companies who use an open source image generator called Stable Diffusion, produced by Stability AI. To be clear, Stable Diffusion is the software that produces the images. However, before it can make anything other than staticky noise, it must be trained on a bunch of data. For those unfamiliar with software training, the clearest way for me to put this is as follows. Generators are like babies. Stick with me. Generators are like babies. All babies are capable of learning any and all languages. All instances of Stable Diffusion could make any sort of image. But a baby must hear a bunch of spoken language, or see a bunch of sign language, or what have you, before the baby can say any words. And the language, or languages, spoken by the adults around any given baby, shape how that baby speaks. Stable Diffusion instances need to be given a bunch of training images before they can produce coherent outputs, and the type of images and instances given will shape what images they produce. Does that make sense? I hope so. Basically, give AI data, AI spit out thing based on data. The class action lawsuit of January 2023 was filed on behalf of artists whose work was used to train instances of Stable Diffusion. The suit claims that multiple instances of Stable Diffusion, operated by multiple companies, were given training images by many artists without the artist's permission. And, once trained, the generators can create work in the style of any one of those artists, a feat otherwise only accomplishable by hiring the artist themselves or one of a few specialized artists capable of replicating wide ranges of styles. On screen are some examples of a generator replicating styles. Stability AI's online Stable Diffusion tool cooked up works in the style of a C418 Minecraft album cover and Dr. Seuss in minutes. And even if you don't think the work is that good of a match for the given style, you can see the work was stylistically different from the work generated without the style tags here. The instances of Stable Diffusion under scrutiny by the lawsuit include Stability AI's Dream Studio, DeviantArt's DreamUp, and Midjourney's Midjourney Discord bot and server. All the companies used a dataset scraped from the internet without regard for data ownership, and none of the parent companies have, quote, attempted to negotiate licenses for any of the training images, end quote. Quote was taken from the class action lawsuit. Pretty clearly, the actions of the companies are unethical from a Kantian perspective. In failing to seek out the proper licenses for their training images, they treat the artists who created the images as a means to the company's end of selling access to generated images. From a rule utilitarian perspective, this action still follows the rule of it is always moral to use AI generators whenever one wants to, as long as one's goal in using them is not to exploit others. The companies did not set out to use their generators to create illicit, harmful, or exploitative content, to sell content that the consumer was unaware was being created by AI, or even to sell content while obscuring where the training data was coming from. Even though the companies did not intend to harm people, they failed to diligently intend not to harm people. Perhaps this rule seems a bit too lenient. People may even turn to its opposite. It is never moral to use AI generators at all. Now, this statement is not contradictory by Kantianism. No one is ethically obligated to adopt the new artistic technology. However, in choosing to abstain, you restrict your ability to create works, both of new kinds and in greater numbers. If your reason for creating art is to impart your worldview upon others and help your audience understand why you care about what you care about, never using AI generators could impede this goal. From a rule utilitarian perspective, dodging all generator use still has drawbacks that the benefits may not outweigh. It pretty much has the opposites of the benefits of the previous rule as the drawbacks, and the opposites of the previous rule's drawbacks as its benefits, more illustrative on screen. Now, whether the benefits or the drawbacks of this rule hold more value is, again, up to you personally. Even if you or I decide that following this rule is the only ethical choice, not everyone will follow suit. Clearly, generators have permeated many aspects of daily life in the past year. ChatGPT now gives applicable tips on how to use it on its landing page. Bing AI launched as part of the search engine, attempting to answer your every query. And even YouTube is releasing 4 generators, from a video idea suggester to a background illustrator for creators to use. If we want to understand what will happen to a world shaped by a new technology, we can look to similar cases in history. In my opinion, the most paradigm-shifting technology for the art world emerged in 1839, a method of commercially viable photography. I claimed in the beginning of the video that when photography was developed, painting fell by the wayside. However, an analysis of primary sources from the mid-1800s called Myths and Misconceptions, Photography and Painting in the 19th Century, reveals that this isn't exactly true. Painters wrote in 1839 about their fears of photography. One contemporary letter told of, quote, an invention which could cause some alarm to our Dutch painters. A method has been found whereby sunlight itself is elevated to the rank of drawing master, and faithful depictions of nature are made the work of a few minutes, end quote. However, the vast majority of obituaries for and letters from painters at the time mentioned photography as an additional source of income or of being no ill consequence to the artists. Painters writing in 1865 and 1910 still had full schedules, even including portraiture commissions. The percentage of submissions to art exhibitions that were portraits did decline over the course of the 1800s, but photography only played a small role in this decline. Photography did not take portraits' place. Few photographs were submitted to art exhibitions, and fewer were accepted. Photography even allowed artists one way to copy their work, either for personal enjoyment or to sell prints of it. Another more traditional way was via woodblock engraving and printing. Photography allowed for the copying of work without the effort of those woodblock copiers. Was using photography unethical then? If you think no, then consider the rule that implies. Using new technology to do a job a person can do is ethical. You should hold, then, in order to be consistent, that using generators to do the job of a concept artist is not unethical. If you think yes, then consider the rule that implies pretty much the opposite. Using technology to do a job a person can do is not ethical. Do you then believe that any tools that replace the work a person could do should not be used? How far does that go? Should we not use plows or trowels because a person could dig holes for seed with their bare flesh? For me personally, the first argument is more compelling. One person who submitted an AI-generated illustration to an art competition and subsequently won claimed, quote, "Art is dead. AI won. It's over." Is art dead? Did AI win? No. Look at photography. People thought photography killed painting. Sunlight itself is elevated to the rank of drawing master, is the 1800s equivalent of art is dead, AI won, but it didn't. People still paint today. The Impressionist movement focused on capturing not the physical form of formal occasions, but the personal perception of intimate moments, rose in the late 1800s. Perhaps that was in response to photography allowing for the capture of the physical form, perhaps not, but in either case, people still paint today, and for many reasons. Some people paint realistically, and some people paint stylistically. Some paint to convey their passions, and some paint to earn income, but all of them paint. Painting isn't dead. Photography didn't kill it. AI is going to go the same way. I am saying this half because I believe it, and half because I want to convince myself of it. For the record, it took a while for photography to even be accepted as an art form, but in recent times, people not only view photography as art, more traditional artists even create paintings using photography. Maybe that's the moral way to use AI generators, as a tool to create more traditional forms of art by using it. It is only moral to use AI generators in the case that one uses generators as a stepping stone in transforming the generation into your own art, perhaps? This, of course, begs the question, where is the line between the art a generator makes and the art I make with the help of a generator? Let's consider 3 different use cases here. First, using AI to generate references or color palettes for a digital painting. I used this AI-generated reference image while I made this painting. Second, using AI to generate images or audio that you edit into a movie. In his video, I used AI in a video, there was backlash. YouTuber Tuatara used an instance of Stable Diffusion, trained off ethically sourced images, and a voice-generating software reading words he and his co-author wrote to make the video The Spider Queen, Chapter 1. Third, using AI to generate text and images that you compile into a book. In December of 2022, one Arctic Hare used ChatGPT, Midjourney, and other generative tools to create the text and images for a children's book about a child and her AI companion. All of these required some input from the part of the people who created them. In scenario 1, I went through the entire process of making this piece of art manually, so I still received cognitive benefits from it. It's just that one of the reference images I used was made by an AI. I am not Tuatara, nor Arctic Hare, so I cannot say what mental benefits they received. But it is clear that they did not engage in the practice of art creation in the typical way, deliberately deciding how each aspect of the art will appeal to its audience. That may change the stress-relieving, reward center-activating, imagination-preparing results of making art, but more studies would need to be done to determine that. Using AI-generated work as reference or to bounce ideas off is, in my opinion, the best way to use generators in art. Under Kantianism, you're not exploiting anyone, even if you use generators with unethically sourced training data. You are essentially consulting the hive mind of the internet for inspiration, which artists have been doing for years. All the training data was taken from the internet. I could have referenced those images or that text directly, which is extremely ethical. That's, pretty much the way you become a better artist, critically consuming more art. You get the benefits of expediting your artistic process, introducing your beliefs to the world, bringing smiles to the faces of others, strengthening your imagination, and pretty much 0 drawbacks, I think. Using ethically trained AI is similar from a Kantian perspective. You are not exploiting anyone. The benefit of making more art faster is stronger with this implementation. A potential detriment of everyone adopting this rule is that fewer artists, be they illustrators, writers, musicians, voice actors, or what have you, would be hired to help make a visionary's dream a reality, but This goes back to that question about the ethics of using tools to replace work a person could do, which I do not have an answer to. Compiling work from unethically trained generators does fail to treat the artists who made the training data as ends in and of themselves, and also causes fewer artists to be hired, but it allows for even faster creation of art. Whether the art provides the same benefits to the creator is unclear at this time. Now, I have written this script as if there is a clear distinction between these three categories, but there really isn't. Take the case of High on Life, a first-person shooter released in late 2022 in which the guns are characters. According to an interview the game's creator and its lead designer did with Sky News, the game used Midjourney, that's one of the image generators trained on unethically sourced data, to make a few art assets in the background. Some people on the internet think the generated assets were several surreal movie posters, but we don't know for sure. We do know that the game's creator intentionally chose an AI generator because, quote, it makes the world feel like a strange alternate universe of our world, end quote. We also know that they, quote, used it to come up with weird, funny ideas, end quote, and used a voice generator to prototype character voices, with a minor role even ending up generated in the final game. This example both references and incorporates works from various generators to make their final product. From a rule utilitarian viewpoint, do the benefits of making an alien game world outweigh the costs of not hiring or contracting artists to make those assets? Do the benefits of overcoming writer's block faster by using a text generator outweigh the costs of no longer working around the block by talking to other real-world people? I don't know. As someone who is currently training to be a game developer, High on Life's creator's assertion in that Sky News interview that, quote, AI is going to be a tool that has the potential to make content creation incredibly accessible, and especially that eventually, quote, all you will need to be is somebody with some big ideas, end quote, is a bit existentially terrifying. Everyone has big ideas, or at least ideas are cheap. The creator literally said he got some ideas from a generator. However, I urge myself and all other game devs listening to remember that we can't foresee what sorts of new art forms are only possible through the use of generators. People enjoy making art. We will continue to make art, even if we end up living in a capitalist hellscape where art has no monetary value. Smiling face with tear emoji. Bonus example! What if you use childbook.ai to spit out a book from a basic description of the plot? This dubious use of generators takes your rough plot idea and fleshes it out into a children's book, presumably for you to read to your kid. I would not use this website to give content to any child. Try, I don't know, Starfall or pbskids.org or your local library instead. Whatever generator the company uses to make the images has a pretty big consistency problem. This, and this are all supposed to be those two distinct characters, but I'm pretty sure that Miniature Poodle and the Snow Sheep here fused or something, I don't know. Concerningly, the consistency problem appears less exaggerated with white characters and more exaggerated with characters of other races and ethnicities. This issue goes back to that hidden drawback of accepting generators in all situations. It was a drawback I myself did not realize until a friend, British Shorthair, brought it to my attention. I was aware, of course, of the fact that generators need to be trained, and that the way they make a work is just by predicting the next most likely incremental change to make to the output. When an AI is fed biased data, it creates biased, read stereotypical, outputs. Now, there's really no such thing as an unbiased AI, just as there is no such thing as an unbiased person. The experiences a person has had, and the content a generative AI has been trained on will shape how the person thinks and what outputs the generator creates. What I had forgotten is that art shapes culture. Art is culture. Generators making biased art can confirm a person's biases or a whole culture's biases if they blindly consume the art and accept it as part of their culture. If you use a generator to look at paintings instead of going to an art gallery, you don't know what sorts of biases you're feeding yourself. The good news is that to counteract this, all you really need to do is hold in mind that the art was not created by a person, but instead by a machine predicting what is most likely to come next, given a prompt. The machine did not have intention, it had data, potentially very skewed data. If it was training on data scraped from the internet, it does not have data of first-hand accounts of people who do not have the internet. Think about who that might be. It is worth noting that even though, as we established before, AI-generated art may not mentally benefit those using the generator, the art does benefit those consuming it. One of my friends was emotionally moved by a beer advertisement generated by AI because it, quote, said something about people that no person had recognized, end quote. They commented that AI takes chaos and just makes something weird. This is what our world looks like out of order, end quote. Baffling generator outputs help us ask, why is that a trend that a computer picks up on? Which, so long as we keep in mind that the generator is not making conscious decisions, nor objective ones, can lead us to uncover biases that we hold ourselves. Consuming generated art is not all negative. A few extra rules that I would throw up for consideration regarding generators and bias. Don't generate character designs, especially if the character in question does not belong to your culture. Instead, consult real representatives of that culture to understand the true stories that the character will represent. Also, don't use a generator to study indigenous art styles or lesser-known cultures. It'll be far more likely to give you a Western Global North stereotype of whatever culture you want to know about. Again, consult actual local representatives, not a generator repackaging the internet's view on whatever the culture is. All of this feeds back into our evaluation of the rule we were analyzing to begin with. It is only moral to use AI generators in the case that one uses generators as a stepping stone in transforming the generation into your own art. We should reevaluate the analysis of those situations, given this new information about biases. A drawback of referencing generated works to create your own works is that you don't know where the generator had gaps or biases in its training data. This is alleviated when you select all the work to train your own generator. You know, or at least could figure out, where the biases lie. Also, if you reference works from an unethically trained generator to inform your art about a culture, you are not respecting the members of that culture as people with their own goals and relationships with their culture, but rather making their aesthetic an accessory to your art. That's not good by Kantianism, guys. Now, this rule isn't perfect, not by any means. The boundaries between what counts as your own art and what doesn't are unclear, and everywhere you could use a generator is affected by bias against what the training data underrepresents. So what? If all of those rules had flaws, what rules should we use? For me, here are the rules I'm going to try to stick to regarding using generators in art. Firstly, I should use generators to speed up my workflow. But if that generator is not properly trained on data all authors consented to giving over, I should not incorporate any generated work into my final product. Right now, that means I can use public generators as reference or a springboard for my ideas, but if I want a generator to produce anything for me to sell or claim as my own, I need to train it myself. Exceptions to this rule are made for incorporating generated work with improperly sourced training data to show an example of generated work with improperly sourced training data, like I have done in this video. Secondly, I must disclaim any work I share that is authored by a generator, partially or in full. In the case of text generators, partial authorship is defined as the author adding 3 or more words in sequence to the final product directly from a generator. Just sort of an arbitrary definition that I made up because one word, you could use it to figure out what word that you wanted to say, which is not, it's almost like an upgraded version of a thesaurus. Going totally off script here. And 2 words, perhaps there's a phrase that you were looking for and you just couldn't remember what it was, and so you described it to the AI. And again, I do not feel that it is unethical to not cite the generator because you cannot figure out a phrase that is in your brain. So 3 words is an arbitrary threshold, but it's my arbitrary threshold. In the case of image generators, partial authorship is defined as copying any contiguous group of pixels directly into the final work. In any case, running a person-made first draft through a generator-based filter, like editing with a text generator or changing the art style of a painting with an image generator, should be disclaimed. Thirdly, just as I attempt to stay aware of my own biases and learn about the real experiences of people before I make art about them, I should be extremely aware that AI-generated work can and will be riddled with stereotypes and Western-focused views of other cultures. This doesn't mean that I can't use AI-generated work. Here's why I think these rules work. Kantianism cares that rules generalize to produce moral results in every situation, so if everyone followed these rules, no one would be left in the dark about what part of the art they consumed is made by generative tools, no artist's work would be taken without their consent, and no one would trust a generator over the narratives of real people. Rule utilitarianism wants you to maximize benefits and minimize detriments. So if everyone followed these rules, it would mitigate all 3 detriments I originally identified. People would still earn the benefits of making the creative decisions, people would still hire artists, and people would still, or, choose to, respect other cultures, while still allowing people to make memes, new art forms, and even expedited versions of current art forms. If you don't believe that these are the best rules to deal with generators in art, I entirely understand. Although my Kantian arguments are universal, they might have flaws, and my rule utilitarian arguments are grounded in my subjective interpretation of the value of making and consuming art. I would love to hear what your rules are, and if or how this video gave you perspective on them. If you feel comfortable, drop a comment. If not, you could also fill out the anonymous Google form in the description. I'm not looking for any personal information, just the basics of your thoughts on AI generators and how you plan to use them ethically. I just gave you homework. I don't know, at least think about it. Now I know what I consider moral use of AI art generators, and hopefully you do too. At least you have a framework for answering the question now. If more people think before blindly rejecting or embracing generators wholesale, I believe we can live in a more loving, more art-filled world. However, AI tools are emerging in more fields than art. AI hiring implements, AI translators, and even AI fashion designers are contributing more and more to our daily lives. If most people assume the AIs are blind to culture, ethnicity, and class, when in reality they have been trained on biased data and are thus biased themselves, these emerging technologies could not only enforce stereotypes like art generators do, but also directly enforce real-world systematic schisms along identitarian lines. If you're curious about the pervasive problems these new technologies pose and how we could solve them as a society, check out this video by my friend British Shorthair. It's her first video, but it's pretty cool. Anyway, keep thinking, take care of yourself, and remember, you are loved.